So, I think there's no question that Barney Rosenberg, Loretta Van Camp are among the heroes of the Cisplatin story. Dr. Einhorn is as well, as were many of our speakers. But I don't think there's also any question that our last speaker of this evening, John Cleland, is also one of those heroes. John was diagnosed with testicular cancer at the age of 22 in 1973. 3 regimens of attempts to cure him. Not only did they not cure him, but by the time he had completed those regimens, the cancer had actually spread to his lungs. At that point in time, in 1974 it was, in October of 1974, he was treated with cisplatin by Dr. Einhorn. 10 days later, his lungs were clear. And he became the first person to be successfully cured by cisplatin. And so it's a true honor to have John Cleland tell us that story.
You just gave half of my speech away, that's all. Well, first of all, I'd like to thank Dr. Hoechley and the entire committee for inviting me here and being able to do this. And I'd like to thank all those students that took part in all the research so many years ago. And it was a little intimidating last night when I walked into the lab over there. I was a little queasy, that's a little as a shrine, as Dr. Einhorn was saying, that's a shrine out in itself. I'd also particularly like to thank Karen Wenk over here for her complete hospitality. When she contacted me several weeks ago about doing this, she's led me by the hand through all this. And Karen, I do thank you exclusively. I will recommend that you get a pay raise. Okay. Of course, my recommendations don't go very far normally, but that's it. And obviously, I want to introduce my wife, Judy, over here. Stand up, Judy. Stand up. Stand up. She and I were married just 5 months before I was diagnosed with cancer. So our honeymoon was short-lived, but since my retirement, I get to spend more time with her now. I feel like we're back on our honeymoon or whatever. And obviously, I could never thank Dr. Einhorn enough. He saved my life. He has saved hundreds of thousands of lives. He's saved thousands and thousands of lives directly by his own hands, but what he's taught so many other of his students that he saved maybe hundreds of thousands to millions of lives indirectly. And I could live to be 1,000,000 years old and I'd never be able to say thank you enough for Dr. Einhorn. Now, today, as I listened to all these speeches, I soon realized something. That all that organic chemistry was going right by me. Organic chemistry was actually one of my favorite classes when I was an undergrad at Purdue University. In fact, it was so much of a favorite of mine that the university asked that I take that course twice. So, biochemistry was almost that same way, I'll tell you. But yeah, so I was out of my comfort zone a little bit today during some of those lectures. I do want to go back into a little bit of history of when I had cancer. As I said, it was just 5 short months after we were married in June of 73 when we got married. And I noticed that even in late August of 73, that one day while taking a shower, I had a little hard spot on my left testicle. But it absolutely did not hurt. I wasn't worried about it. I had a former roommate that told me one day that he had a little bit of a testicle problem. He went to the doctor, and the doctor said it was viral, and give a couple weeks, it'll go away. And he said it did. It was just fine. Well, I thought that would happen to me, so I wasn't too concerned until it started to hurt. And also about this time then, I was interviewing for a job at the University of Missouri, and I didn't want that job interview to interfere with, or the doctor's appointment to interfere with the appointment at Missouri, and so I kept putting the doctor's appointment off. Finally, when I did, general practitioner, and I can still quote him today, saying, "Mr. Cleland, 95% chance, there's absolutely nothing wrong with you. But to cure or to cover that last 5%, I'm going to send you to a urologist." Well, I was so young and so green, I had no idea what a urologist was. But I was to see him in 2 weeks. Well, in those 2 weeks, that testicle just exploded in size, almost to the size of my fist. I saw the urologist on a Tuesday afternoon. He said, "Mr. Cleland, I want you at St. Elizabeth's Hospital tomorrow morning, 7 o'clock, which is a Wednesday morning. Thursday morning, he removed the testicle. I came out of the anesthesia, and he said, "Mr. Cleland, I'm sorry, but you have testicular cancer." I never knew there was such thing as testicular cancer until that day. Okay. 2 weeks later, I'm down at the IU Medical Center. Dr. John Donahue, one of the finest physicians I've ever had the pleasure of meeting. He performed a 9.5-hour operation on me from stem to stern, basically, removing 52 lymph nodes in a procedure called a retroperitoneal node dissection, of which, again, 52 lymph nodes removed, 3 were found to be microscopically malignant. 5 days later, on December 3rd, is when I first was introduced to Dr. Larry Einhorn. He came into my room and told me that I was going to be taking a drug called mithramycin. Mithramycin, yeah. Something that I think came from medieval times, actually. Although in comparison to the other drugs, it was very minor. I'd vomit once or twice a day there for the 5 days I had it, and it wasn't any real problem. So I go about my business. Middle of February 1974 rolls around. I come back to Indiana because I was in Missouri now having this job, and I had just a routine checkup with Dr. Donahue, and I told him that my left testicle, or where the left testicle was, and that scrotum, there were some hard spots developing. Well, apparently during the removal of the testicle in the first place, a few cells had been left behind, cancer cells were left behind, and they started the process of regrowing, and now Dr. Einhorn put me on 3 drugs called adriamycin, bleomycin, and oncovin. And ABO. The adriamycin I nicknamed the Red Devil because I'll tell you, it was pure hell. Okay, it was red in color, but boy, it was pure hell. And we were on that from late February, 74, to probably July of 74. Meantime, while taking these 3 drugs, my weight went from 158 pounds down to 106. I didn't have a hair on my body, had stomatitis so badly that I wouldn't even swallow my own saliva at times, and I would spit into a cup or tin can or something of that nature. And then I'd wind up in the hospital because I was dehydrated. Okay. From there, in August, Dr. Einhorn thought it was best that we maybe transfer to a new drug, a different drug, because the adriamycin was obviously killing me. It was controlling the testis cancer, but it was killing me faster than it was killing the cancer cells. So we switched to the drug he mentioned here a little while ago, actinomycin D. Now, in comparison, actinomycin D was far worse than any other drug I ever took. Why? Because it was constant vomiting for 24 to 36 hours. It might have gotten a lot better after that 36-hour period, but boy, I couldn't even sleep hardly. Take a 10-minute nap and then wake up violently ill, and you go on. And then in September 27th, Dr. Einhorn, I told myself I wouldn't do this. Okay, Dr. Einhorn called me into his office, and he put 2 chest films on the light and began saying, "I want you to take a look at these two films here, John." And I began looking at them, and I began thinking to myself, boy, whoever film this belongs to, that guy's in trouble. Well, it took me about 5 seconds to realize that guy was me. It wasn't just some guy, that guy was me. And about that time, he said, John, I'm sorry, there's not much more we can do for you. And while my heart is pounding out of my chest and my mind's racing 100 miles an hour, but, oh my God, I'm going to panic and go crazy here. He said something to me about, well, you can be one of the very first people in the world to try a new chemotherapy. And being young and panicking and stupid and everything else, I didn't ask him a lot of questions, really. I asked him, well, what would happen if I didn't take it? Because believe me, death was almost a good option for me. Okay, but I thank my high school coaches, believe it or not, and my older brother and my grandma a lot, because they were very competitive people, and they taught me how to tolerate pain and not give up. And I was in a battle with that cancer, and it wasn't going to beat me. I was just that competitive a person. I still am in a lot of ways. And I just refused to give up. And I said, well, we might as well try it. Have nothing to lose. And other people, as I told later on, have nothing to lose. So we gave it a try. And as was already told, on October 7th, I go into the hospital for 5 days of treatment with cisplatin. And back then, we didn't call it cisplatin. We called it platinol. Okay? And had the five days of treatment, a lot of digestive issues, so to speak, as Dr. Einhorn recalled, and went home. On October 20th, a Sunday night, I began running a fever of 104.5. Called my nurse, Becky Bond. She said, well, I'll call Dr. Einhorn right away. Well, I got the message back that I was to show up at the IU hospital, go through the emergency room, and whenever I did that, they would take a chest x-ray. Next morning, Dr. Einhorn comes into my room. He says, John, your chest x-rays are clear. Okay. 10 days after my last treatment with cisplatin, that my chest x-rays were clear. Okay. And I got to tell you, that's probably the happiest day of my life. I tell a lot of people, I know I was laying on that mattress in that hospital room, but I was not touching it. I was floating on air, ladies and gentlemen. And now, where I want to go with this next is that most people would assume that Dr. Larry Einhorn was the one who told me about cisplatin in the first place. Back the days before the internet, I couldn't read a medical journal if my life depended on it, probably. Okay, plus I didn't have access to medical journals. No. Larry Einhorn was not the first person to tell me about cisplatin. In fact, I'm going to tell you the rest of the story. Have you ever heard that phrase before? Who's heard that phrase? And now the rest of the story. Page 4. I think this was page 1 or 2, though, actually. Okay. Now, if you're too young and you don't know the rest of the story, okay, that was said by Paul Harvey, a famous radio newscaster. He is the one that told me about cisplatin in the first place. One day in the summer of '74, and I know my dates. You've heard me here in the last few minutes rattle off this date and that date, whatever. I don't have a clue. I'm not even sure what month it was. But I would say it was either late June, July, or maybe early August. I heard the rest, he gave you a little tease. Scientists, and I'm not trying to quote him, but I'm going to be fairly close, I think. Scientists, and he named Barney Rosenberg, I'm sure of that, and his team of scientists at Michigan State University believe they've come up with a cure for cancers. And then he went to an advertisement. Okay. Then he came back and said, and now the rest of the story. Okay. And he told a little bit more about it. I think he even used the terminology of a platinum salt, maybe, I'm not quite sure. And he told a little bit about the electrodes and the process of prohibitive reproduction of the E. coli and so on and so forth. And I'm telling myself then, man, I got to go tell Larry Einhorn this at my next appointment. And so Dr. Einhorn calls me into his office, and he sits me down on the examination bench and has my shirt off, and he's listening to my chest, and he's palpating my lymph nodes here, and he's palpating my abdomen and my underarms and so on and so forth. And I began telling him, I said, Dr. Einhorn, I heard Paul Harvey on the radio about 10 days ago talking about a possible cure for cancer. And if you know Dr. Einhorn, he can concentrate on one thing, okay, at a time. And he does. I mean, if he's concentrating and thinking, and you can fire a gun next to his head and he won't hear the gun. He's really that kind of a guy. And I know his response when I'm telling him this. He basically, he's palpating away. And yeah, doc, the MSU guys maybe found a new cure for cancer. And he's saying, well, we've heard these stories before. Don't get excited, John. Boom, that was it. Who knows? 3 months later, oh, let's try a brand new chemotherapy, John. But but say a couple of other things. Having cancer back then was really in the dark ages, really in the medieval times, as I said earlier. And cancer just was absolutely the world's worst thing that could ever happen to me. It just destroyed me physically. It nearly destroyed me mentally. But boy, it wrecked me physically and plans that we had made and so on and so forth. But I've got to also tell you this. While it did that, having cancer is probably the fourth or fifth best thing to ever happen to me as well. I can get up every day. I have very few days that are bad days. Some are better than others, okay? It's just very few bad days. And I get up and, man, well, I don't want to get out of bed, really. Getting out of the bed is a good thing. Because if I didn't get out of bed, where would I be, So having cancer is probably really one of the best things that ever happened to me. I get to do things like this. Now, I've got to apologize for one thing. That is not having any slides. No slides, no pictures. But somebody's applauding. But I got to tell you, had I known I'd be giving this speech 45 years ago, I'd have been taking some notes and some pictures and stuff. I just living for the next day, really, is what we were doing. But so I got to apologize for no notes. And I do want to recommend one possible thing. How many people in here have attended, work for, represent, in some nature, a Big Ten university today? I'm a big fan of the Big Ten, or 14 today, as they, you add the others, okay, the Big Ten. But I think it's, while we're very, very competitive on the athletic fields, so on, that type of thing, I really admire the cooperation of the Big Ten universities. They're noted research institutions. All the cancer research that's being done on the Big Ten campuses and the cooperation that happens between them, I really, really admire that. Particularly in my case, because here you have Michigan State University, the pioneer of land-grant colleges. And boy, I love my land-grant colleges, I'll tell you. Being a Purdue grad, my wife's a Purdue grad. In fact, before I go there, she's one of the first 200 women to ever graduate from Purdue in engineering. One of the world's most famous engineering jobs. There she is. Okay. Actually, I did the research a couple summers ago. She's 178 is what she is. I really admire the Big Ten and the land-grant colleges in particular. But how many times do we have a university like Michigan State that discovered cisplatin, and it's possible, or the chemotherapy or the possible chemotherapy effects on cancer. And the pioneer of land-grant colleges, and even though the word serendipity has been used hundreds of times, it seems like today, they saw that and they picked that ball up and ran toward a new goal line. Larry Einhorn from Indiana University used his genius to overcome the toxicity of cisplatin and turn it into human cures. And then I'm a Purdue Boilermaker. Okay, I was the only one who was tough enough and determined enough to tolerate that crap to begin with. Okay. So I think there's a huge possibility of the Big Ten, picking that ball up, as I said, and running with it, and doing a lot of good, additional good in the future years for cancer research. Hey, I challenge you people as scientists to never give up, to keep researching, to keep working. This has been 45 years since our relationship started. Cancer is still a killer. I'd love to see cancer eliminated in my lifetime, ladies and gentlemen. Hey, thank you very much. I appreciate it.
John, that was fantastic. There's a lot of people that I do need to thank before we conclude. First and foremost, I'd like to thank all the speakers. It's hard for me to actually follow up, John. But it really has been a fantastic couple of days. I want to thank all the speakers. I want to thank all of those who presented posters yesterday as well. John certainly alluded to it, but Michigan State really deserves to be proud of this. Without Michigan State, Loretta and Barney would not have been together. There would not have been that cisplatin being delivered to Dr. Einhorn to be treating John and to have the effect that it has had, not only on the patients that cisplatin has cured, but I think we saw today how that inspired so much in the area of cancer research. And I know that in addition to John, there are other cancer survivors in this crowd, including my wife. And it really has made a difference. And it makes me proud, actually, to be a scientist, to be part of Michigan State University. So having said that, let me thank a number of people. Our sponsors, Michigan State University, the MSU Foundation, MSU Department of Chemistry, MSU College of Natural Science, the MSU Innovation Center, MSU Office of the President, MSU Office of the Provost, MSU Office of the Vice President for Research and Graduate Studies. I think we're out of offices. And Hiraeus, Jim, how do you pronounce that? Hiraeus, who's also sponsored the speaker lunch today. When Jim and I began to talk about this, we thought about having a nice symposium in the chemistry building, and it really expanded to much more than that. And that was made possible really by the tremendous help we got from Karen Wank, who was already mentioned, Vel Oswowski, who's been my boss through this last day and a half as well, Cynthia Schneider, who's really kept things going for us as well, Aaron Richard, Amber Shin, Brenda Minot, Sarah Quarshi, Mary Rose, and Bob Rosico. And I should say Bob Rosico's student workers, two of whom are sons of people in this audience, including my own, who actually were cleaning the windows and things like that to make the chemistry building, which many of you have been to chemistry buildings before. They usually don't look that nice. I want to thank the MSU Alumni Association for live streaming the event, University Advancement for their help in the overall event logistics and registration, and the Kellogg Center and their staff for hosting us. And so let's give everybody a round of applause. Of course, thanks to everybody here for attending this great event. Enjoy the rest of the night. Safe travels, especially for those of you who are heading out. It's Go Green, so we're going to recycle our name badges. So there should be a basket somewhere to recycle those. But I do see there's a hand up. Yes. Yeah, and if you were there this morning, when you hear those beeps, and we were wondering, those were people logging in, I think, to the live stream, actually. Any other questions? All right, well, listen, thanks again. Fantastic event. Hopefully we can do another one of these, maybe for the 50th anniversary.